I pretended to be broke for 5 years while building my empire, then watched my gold digger wife's face when she saw my real net worth. The whole thing started when I decided to live like I was barely scraping by, even though my bank account was growing every single day. I wore the same 3 worn-out shirts, drove a beat-up Honda that made weird noises when I turned left, and lived in a tiny apartment that smelled like the neighbors cooking all the time. My wife thought I was just another struggling guy trying to make it in America, working long hours for pennies while she complained about our cheap grocery store trips and how we never went anywhere nice. She married me thinking I had potential, but after 2 years of what she saw as financial failure, her attitude completely changed. Every conversation became about money, about how her friends' husbands could afford nice things, about how embarrassing it was to show up to parties in my old car. She started staying out later, claiming she was with girlfriends, but I could smell different cologne on her clothes when she came home. The irony was killing me because while she was out there probably looking for someone with more money, I was quietly building something massive. Every day after my regular job, I'd go to my real office across town, the one she knew nothing about. I'd started with a small investment in tech stocks right after college, and through some incredibly lucky timing and a lot of research, I'd managed to turn a few thousand into something much bigger. But the real money came from a side business I'd stumbled into almost by accident. I'd been helping a friend fix his computer, and he mentioned how hard it was to find reliable tech support for small businesses. That got me thinking, and within 6 months, I had a whole network of freelancers working under me, providing IT solutions to companies across 3 states. The money was rolling in, but I kept it all in separate accounts she knew nothing about. The hardest part wasn't keeping the secret from her, it was watching her slowly lose respect for me. She'd roll her eyes when I suggested we cook dinner instead of ordering takeout. She'd sigh dramatically when I said we couldn't afford a vacation to Hawaii. And she started making little comments about how her sister's husband was such a provider. The worst was when she started talking about how she might need to find a better job herself, with the implication that I wasn't pulling my weight. What really broke my heart was realizing that the woman I'd married wasn't the person I thought she was. I'd fallen for her smile, her laugh, the way she used to light up when she saw me. But somewhere along the way, she'd become someone who measured love in dollar signs and judged success by the size of our apartment and the age of our car. The first major twist came when I overheard her on the phone with someone, talking about how she was wasting her best years with a loser who couldn't even afford to take her to a decent restaurant. She was laughing with whoever was on the other end about how she'd give me another few months before she started looking for an exit strategy. The pain of hearing those words was like a physical punch to my chest. But then something unexpected happened that changed everything. My business partner called me with news that a major corporation wanted to buy out our entire operation. The offer was so large that when he told me my share over the phone, I literally had to sit down. We're talking about life-changing money, the kind that would set up not just me but my kids and their kids for generations. I decided to test something before making any big decisions about my marriage. I started dropping little hints about a possible promotion at work. Nothing major, just casual mentions of how things might be looking up. Almost immediately, her attitude shifted. She started being more affectionate, more interested in my day, more willing to do things together. It was like watching someone flip a switch, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. The second twist came when I found out she'd been more than just emotionally distant. I discovered she'd been meeting with another man, someone she'd met through her job who drove a fancy car and took her to expensive restaurants. The evidence was right there in her phone, which she'd left unlocked on the kitchen counter. Photos of them together at places I'd never seen. Messages talking about how much better he treated her than her broke husband. Reading those messages was devastating, but it also crystallized something for me. I realized I'd been living in a fantasy, hoping that somehow the woman I'd married was still in there, just buried under disappointment and financial stress. But the truth was that her character had been revealed through adversity, and she'd failed the test completely. The third twist was discovering that her new boyfriend wasn't as wealthy as he pretended to be. Through some digging, I found out he was actually drowning in debt, living off credit cards and borrowed money to maintain his lifestyle. The expensive dinners and gifts were all financed through loans he couldn't afford, and his fancy car was leased with payments he was already behind on. So here I was, genuinely wealthy beyond most people's dreams, married to a woman who was cheating on me with a man who was actually broker than she thought I was. The irony was almost too much to handle, but it also gave me a sense of clarity about what I needed to do next. I started planning my exit strategy, but not in the way she might have expected. First, I moved most of my assets into accounts and investments that would be protected in a divorce. I consulted with lawyers about the best way to handle things, given that we lived in a state where adultery could affect the settlement. I gathered evidence of her affair, screenshots of messages, credit card statements showing expensive dinners on days she claimed to be working late. The fourth twist came when she announced she was pregnant. For a moment, my heart stopped, thinking about how this would complicate everything. But then she kept talking, and I realized she wasn't sure who the father was. She wanted to work on our marriage, she said, and thought maybe a baby would bring us closer together. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. I played along for a few weeks while I got my affairs in order. I acted excited about the pregnancy, talked about how we'd need to start saving for the baby, how we'd have to be more careful with money than ever. She seemed frustrated by this response, probably hoping I'd suddenly reveal some hidden savings or take out loans to improve our lifestyle for the baby. But the final twist was the biggest one of all. The paternity test I secretly arranged showed that the baby wasn't mine. The timeline matched up perfectly with her affair, and suddenly all her talk about working on our marriage and new beginnings made perfect sense. She'd been planning to trap me into raising another man's child while she figured out her next move. That's when I decided it was time to reveal everything. I chose a Friday evening, right after she'd spent the day texting with her boyfriend about how much she hated her life and couldn't wait to get away from me. I'd prepared everything carefully, printed out bank statements, investment portfolios, business valuations, everything that showed the real scope of what I'd built. She was sitting on our cheap couch, complaining about how tired she was and how we needed to start buying better food for the baby, when I walked in with a folder full of papers. I sat down across from her and just started laying out documents, one by one without saying a word. The first document was a bank statement showing a balance that had more zeros than she'd probably ever seen in her life. I watched her eyes widen then narrow, trying to process what she was looking at. Then came the investment portfolio, showing diversified holdings worth more than most people's houses. But the real shock came when I showed her the business valuation and the buyout offer. The number was so large that she actually gasped and looked at me like I was playing some kind of cruel joke. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how this was possible, how I could have had this much money while we were living like we were broke. Her face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 30 seconds. First confusion, then excitement, then calculation, then fear, and finally a kind of desperate hope. She started reaching for the papers, asking how long I'd had this money, why I'd never told her, whether this meant we could finally start living the life she'd always wanted. That's when I pulled out the second folder. This one contained printed screenshots of all her messages with her boyfriend, photos of them together, credit card statements showing where she'd been when she claimed to be working late, and the paternity test results. I laid these out just as methodically as I'd done with the financial documents. The color drained from her face as she realized what she was looking at. She tried to grab the papers, tried to explain, tried to claim that it wasn't what it looked like, but I just kept pulling out more evidence. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts, restaurant receipts, hotel reservations, everything that proved she'd been living a double life. The moment that will stay with me forever was when she finally understood that I'd known about her affair before revealing my wealth. She realized that I hadn't shown her the money to save our marriage, but as part of ending it. The look of absolute devastation on her face was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. She tried everything then. She claimed she'd made a mistake, that she'd only turned to someone else because she thought I couldn't provide for her, that if she'd known about the money she never would have strayed. She promised to end things with her boyfriend, to be the wife I deserved, to make everything right. But the damage was done and we both knew it. She'd shown me exactly who she was when she thought I had nothing to offer her. She'd been willing to cheat on me, to lie to me, to potentially trick me into raising another man's child, all because she thought I was financially unsuccessful. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. With evidence of adultery and paternity fraud, she had very little leverage. Her boyfriend disappeared the moment he found out she was getting divorced and wouldn't be receiving any significant settlement. Apparently, his interest in her was just as financially motivated as hers had been in other men. The most satisfying part wasn't even the money I kept. It was watching her realize that she'd thrown away a genuinely good thing for the illusion of something better. She'd had a husband who loved her, who was actually wealthy beyond her wildest dreams, who would have given her everything she claimed to want, and she traded it all for a relationship with a man who was even broker than she thought I was. Now I'm single, genuinely wealthy, and I've learned one of the most valuable lessons of my life. I learned that money doesn't change who people are, it reveals who they've always been. My ex-wife didn't become greedy and unfaithful because we lived modestly. She was always that person underneath, just waiting for the right circumstances to show her true character. The experience taught me that the next time I'm in a serious relationship, I'll be much more careful about understanding someone's values before I commit to them. I'll pay attention to how they treat people who can't do anything for them, how they handle disappointment, how they respond to adversity. I've also learned that there's something to be said for living below your means, even when you don't have to. The years I spent living simply taught me what I actually needed to be happy, and it wasn't expensive restaurants or luxury cars. It was having someone who loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. These days, I'm rebuilding my life with a much clearer understanding of what I want and what I won't accept. I'm not bitter about what happened, because it taught me lessons that will serve me for the rest of my life. I know now that true partnership means being with someone who stands by you during the tough times, not someone who starts looking for an exit strategy the moment things get difficult. The money is nice, don't get me wrong, but the real treasure was discovering my own worth and learning to value authenticity over everything else. I dodged a bullet with my ex-wife, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. She showed me exactly who she was, and I'm grateful I learned the truth before it was too late. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd revealed my wealth earlier in our marriage. Would she have been faithful if she'd known I could afford everything she wanted? But I realize that's the wrong question. The right question is whether I want to be with someone whose faithfulness depends on my bank account balance. The answer to that question is absolutely not. I want someone who chooses me when I'm at my lowest point, someone who believes in me even when I'm struggling, someone who measures our relationship by the love and respect we share rather than the size of our house or the cost of our vacations. My ex-wife taught me that some people see relationships as transactions, where love is conditional on what you can provide. I learned that I never want to be in a relationship like that again, where I have to wonder if my partner would stick around if my circumstances changed. Now I'm focusing on building genuine connections with people who share my values, people who understand that real wealth comes from having someone who loves you unconditionally. The money will always be there, but finding someone with true character, someone who would choose me even if I really was broke, that's the real prize. Looking back, I can see that my ex-wife actually did me a favor by showing her true colors. She saved me from years of being married to someone who didn't really love me, someone who was just waiting for a better opportunity to come along. The pain of discovering her betrayal was worth it for the clarity it brought to my life. These days, when I meet someone new, I'm much more patient about revealing my financial situation. I want to know who they are when they think I'm just an ordinary guy, when they have no financial incentive to be interested in me. I want to see how they treat service workers, how they respond to adversity, how they handle disappointment. The whole experience has made me a more thoughtful person and a better judge of character. I've learned to value authenticity over everything else, and I'm grateful for the lessons, even though they came at such a high emotional cost. Sometimes the most valuable education is also the most painful.